Hey everyone, I'm back from a family visit for the Yuletide holidays, and it's time to use this last long weekend of 2024 to build another old kit. This time, it's a Hasegawa F4U-D1 Corsair in 1/72nd, first tooled in 1981, so old I was still in high school. It's a fairly simple build, but the decals are from 2014, so they are fresh and nicely registered. There are some pin marks and flash, but nothing over the top for a 44-year-old kit. Once again, I chose to do some painting on the sprue. I chose to paint the bits that would be on the inside or the parts that would not have been painted in camouflage color on the real McCoy. So lots of zinc chromate green and interior pea green. I know folks will call for the salmon pink chromate on these Void aircraft, but I only have the green on hand, and there was a better than 50% chance that any of these birds were in green chromate, not pink chromate. Decals on the armrest and homemade seat belts installed, so we're ready to add the interior to one side of the fuselage. While the glue dried, it was time to work on those iconic gull wings. There's a little flash and cleanup, but for the most part, the three parts fit together very well and glued up easily. Back to the fuselage, and the horizontal stabilizers fit like a glove. No issues with this kit whatsoever with fit of parts. For an older kit, its fit was extremely good, and after you cleaned up the tool flash, every part just kind of fit together with very little mold seams. Like most kits that come with optional equipment, you have to drill out the attachment points before assembly. I planned to add the drop tank, so I had to drill out those holes in the bottom of the fuselage, which is part of the underwing assembly. The last bit of assembly is the engine and the cowling. I really like the way they did this. They just pre-mount the pre-painted engine to the front of the body. There's a big locator pin there, so you can't get it upside down. And then the cowling just fits over it, and everything is round and in the proper shape the first time. No adding 4 or 5 parts together and trying to get it to fit. I'm looking at you, Airfix. Finally, before priming, I used PVA glue to temporarily fix the landing gear covers in place. One, this keeps all the paint from the wheel well details, and I can color match the covers to the underside of the plane. I started priming on the center of the belly in white, from the nose to the tail and out toward the wing points where they would have hinged for stowage on aircraft carriers, remembering that this bird was originally designed for the Navy before they handed it off to the Marines. The rest of the plane got a glossy black primer coat, as I'm planning to hairspray chip the top color and the chromate anti-corrosion layers down to bare aluminum. So, after taping off the white, I got round to painting the rest of the aluminum color, and sealed that under some satin varnish. Then I decanted some cheap hairspray and lightly applied it over the satin varnish using my airbrush. I let the hairspray flash off for 5 to 15 minutes and then sprayed the green chromate over the top. While the acrylic paint dried, I gathered some tools. Adding water to the acrylic softens the hairspray underneath, allowing you to remove the paint to reveal the color below the satin varnish. You can go as heavy or as light as you like, but here's the level I chose. Here's a pro tip. Make sure you take a picture for reference to where the chip for the second layer. Again, we repeat the varnish, hairspray, top color process. This time I used US Navy Deep Sea Blue, but lightened it with a little bit of some faded blue. The dark blue color just came off way too dark, in my opinion. Back to the chipping. This time, I kept the chips and scratches smaller and isolated to where I had chipped the previous color. My workhorse for these small chip areas is an old, small brush with the bristles cut down short. This leaves the bristles a little stiffer than normal, but allows you to control how much of the chipping you take off. Here's the final look I got. remembering to seal everything under a gloss varnish so that the hairspray won't reactivate again. Now onto the decals. This is why I used gloss varnish for the final seal. And this is where my easy build also stumbled. There are only a few decals, but the checkerboard on the nose and the tail are bold and distinctive. I wasn't happy with how the tail came out. Even though these weren't old decals, they were very thin and they didn't want to conform to some of the protrusions and ripped before molding into shape. So I came back in with decal remover, but I still could not get the decals off. I must have left them for too long and the remover just didn't touch them. So I ended up taping off the parts I didn't want to repaint and laid down more of that blue color. I think the final look gives the impression of a plane that has spent some time flying in and around some sandy islands in the South Pacific. Chipped and scratched, but not over the top. The kit called for both the Marine and the Navy versions to be painted all over dark blue, but I thought that would look kind of boring. That's why I sprayed the white on the belly and the wings out to the fold points. I wanted this scheme to look more like a mid-war bird before the overall blue directives came later in the war. I need to change the plane number, as the kit didn't have dark numbers for the Marine scheme that would go on the front landing gear covers that are painted white. It all worked out well in the end. Even with the tape peeling some of the side fuselage decal off, I used that as an opportunity to add paint peeling to the national markings as well. Now let's get started on that diorama base. First thing I wanted were some marks and mats for the plane to sit on. These were steel planks that were used to stabilize soil and sand. And I found this 3D printable STL on Thingiverse. And after scaling them to 1/72nd scale, I was able to get 20 or so on a build plate and print them in less than an hour. Getting them off the supports just took time and clippers, but once primed and painted, I used Vallejo's oily steel, they were ready for the diorama. The base itself was a 1/2-inch pink foam insulation glued to a thin layer of hardboard. The top of the foam was painted a tan color before adding the Vallejo texture paste, beach sand. This stuff is like colored acrylic paste with grit mixed into it. It sticks to the foam really well, and it takes a while to dry, which allows you to sculpt and press objects into it. Once it does fully dry, it acts like a glue to hold anything you pressed into it in place. So I laid the mats out on the sand in a pattern, and I wasn't too concerned um, if some of the sand got on the top side. It kind of makes the mats look like they've been pushed into the sand from repeated use, or the sand has been kicked up by props or something like that. Anyhow, after an overnight dry, a speed paint from Army Painter was diluted and spread over the uncovered sand. I used the color Sand Golem. I like doing this as it gives the sand a slightly darker color and helps show off some of the sand texture. Lastly, some green clump foliage was added to the side with a slight rise to look like the plane's stand was cut out of the jungle brush. And then we just glued the plane in place. I didn't have any Pacific Theater figures to go with this plane, so it's just the plane parked in place this time. I hope you enjoyed this end of the year build. I know I had fun with this older kit, and it really was just a refreshing kit to build after the last one that just fought me tooth and nail. Anyhow, until next year, happy modeling.